Well, this morning we are up to Mark chapter 14, verses 43 to 52 in our verse-by-verse study through the Gospel of Mark. We are currently, as you know, in the final week of Jesus' life, leading up to his death by way of crucifixion. We are, in fact, in the final 24-hour period leading up to. So we're not just in the final week. I mean, we've been in Jesus' final week for months now. But now we're up to like the final 24 hours, so I'd say that we're at least 2 months in that. But anyway, all that to say, we are up to this final period of time, and on reflection, what a week it's been. It's been a massive week for all of us who have been going through the study. It's been massive months, but for Jesus, it's been a massive week. The Passion Week that began on Monday as Jesus entered into Jerusalem in triumph, when the streets were just lined with people who were hailing him as the promised Messiah. That was on Monday. Then on Tuesday, Jesus exposed the corrupt dealings in the temple. He removed the merchants and the money changers, those people who had turned the house of prayer into a den of thieves. And so there's a bit of a removal which took place on the Tuesday. On Wednesday, Jesus returned to the temple, he taught the people, and he preached against the hypocrisy of the religious Jewish leaders at that time. Wednesday evening came around, and Jesus launched into an extended discourse, an extended description of what was going to take place in the future in answer to some of his disciples' questions about future things. And it was on that Wednesday, much to the delight of the Jewish religious leaders in that day, well, good old Judas comes along and he agrees to betray Jesus into their hands. That was on Wednesday. Then we get to Thursday evening. Jesus, he comes and he celebrates the Passover meal with his disciples, and it's on that very same evening that he institutes the Lord's Supper. As he's instituting the Lord's Supper, and just before he institutes the Lord's Supper, we know that Judas, the betrayer, he slips away to go and inform the religious Jewish leaders about Jesus' whereabouts. And it's from that Passover meal, immediately following the Passover meal, well, that's where Jesus led his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane, which is where we got to last Sunday. And it was during those hours in the Garden of Gethsemane that Jesus endured the most intense and the most immense temptation. He became physically overwhelmed by the horrors that he knew awaited him. Yet, having been strengthened from his hours in prayer time, well, Jesus then moved forward in obedient submission to the Father's will. What did he say? He said, "Not what I will, but what you will." Those are the exact words that he said. I'll submit myself to the will of the Father. Although it's going to be difficult, although the road ahead is not going to be easy, I will submit myself to the will of God. Well, as Jesus was speaking to his very sleepy disciples at that point in time in the garden, he was aware that Judas and his betrayer, along with a crowd was coming to arrest him. And it's interesting there in the garden, he didn't try to hide. He knew exactly what was going to happen. Being God, he knew everything that was going to happen, detail by detail. He knew what was going to take place, but he did not hide, and he didn't try to escape. Instead, he boldly went out to confront his enemies. And really, that leads us right up to today's passage. In today's passage, the focus is on the actual account of Jesus' betrayal, which leads then to his arrest. We have previously talked about Judas' betrayal. We've talked about it at length. We've seen how Judas has gone about to plot the betrayal of Jesus, and we've also seen who's involved, who are the players, who are the participants in this betrayal which is about to take place. But in today's passage, it's not something that's going to talk about something that's going to take place in the future. Today's passage, we see how the betrayal plays itself out in real time. We're going to see what exactly takes place at the betrayal of Jesus. And really, this is the primary focus of what it is that we're looking at here in our study this morning. Now, for you note takers, by way of an outline, we're going to see first of all in verse 43, the hostile crowd. Secondly, in verses 44 to 46, we're going to see the hypocritical traitor. Verse 47, the hasty disciple. Verses 48 to 49, the heroic Christ. And finally, in verses 50 to 52, the horrified apostles. The hostile crowd, the hypocritical traitor, the hasty disciple, the heroic Christ, and finally, the horrified apostles. And so let's just begin first of all by giving our attention now to our Bibles, beginning there in verse 43, in which we see the hostile crowd. Notice it in your Bibles, verse 43. And immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, with a great multitude with swords and clubs, came from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. And so, as we begin to look at this account of Jesus' arrest, it's important for us to recognize that his arrest is really going to set into motion from this point forward a series of events. And these series of events are going to take place in rapid fire. They're going to take place very, very quickly, very, very close together. It's going to be a rapid series of events that are going to take place within about a 13 to 15 hour period, which would climax or culminate in the crucifixion of Jesus on that very same day. At this point, it was only a matter of hours, Jesus would stand before magistrates. He would stand before the Jewish Sanhedrin, the 70 Jewish men that made up the leadership council of the Jews. He will stand before the Roman governor Pilate. He would stand before King Herod Antipas. And after being sentenced to death, Jesus would be tortured. He'd be tortured by the Roman soldiers. He'd be shamefully paraded down the streets to his place of execution. And it's there that Jesus would be painfully executed as he was nailed to a cross. Now, what we have to understand in terms of the time frame, all of these things are going to take place in a period no longer than our own waking hours today. The amount of time that we're awake today, around about, is about the amount of time that all of these events that we're going to be looking at over probably a few months now, all of these events are going to be taking place. Very rapid, very short period of time. So there, in verse 43, we begin to see exactly how this betrayal and how the arrest of Jesus actually starts off, how this is played out in real time. Notice first of all, the participants. Who are involved in this betrayal? Who are involved in the crowd who is coming? Who makes up this hostile crowd that comes to Jesus in the dark of night? Well, firstly, notice there that there is Judas who is identified. But not only is he identified as Judas, notice in your Bible, he's also identified as one of the 12. Not only is Judas, but one of the 12. This truth is so incredibly shocking that the one who would betray Jesus was actually part of that close-knit, intimate group that followed Jesus. This was so shocking that every single gospel writer included this detail that Judas is one of the 12. Each and every one of them sees it. They can't fathom it. It's like they can't believe it. Each single gospel writer says not just Judas, but he also mentions him as one of the 12. Now, I know we've talked about this at great lengths previous weeks, but for the disciples, I think that the betrayal of Jesus is really something that would have really stuck with them for many, many years. I mean, think about it. Have you ever experienced it? Have you ever experienced when there's been someone who's close to you, who's turned around on you, who's turned their back on you, who's come at you with all the unjustifiable fury and force of the flesh? Or some of the disciples, have you ever witnessed that happen to someone else? Have you seen someone who seems to be tight with someone else, and then have you seen what can so quickly turn around, and you see a person treating the other person like an enemy instead of a friend? It's got to be one of the most horrible, heart-wrenching things that anyone would ever experience, or that anyone would ever have to see take place. For the disciples to have seen this firsthand, how close Judas was, but to see how drastically he turned, I'm sure this is something that stuck with them and would have been hard for them to shake for a long time, so that even after the fact, so many years, even decades after the fact, here the writers of these Gospels they are still reminded and still articulated, not only Judas, but one of the 12. In addition to Judas, notice verse 43, it says that he was accompanied by a great multitude great multitude were carrying swords and clubs. They were heavily armed. And notice also in verse 43 that this great multitude was sent. They just didn't come on their own initiative, but they were sent by the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders, who were the religious Jewish leaders in that day. Now, in John's Gospel, he elaborates a little bit more to try to help us to understand, well, who is this great multitude? I mean, Mark says there's a whole lot of people, in other words, a big, great number of people coming to join Judas in terms of bringing this arrest about. But who is this great multitude? We're told in John chapter 18, verse 3. It says, then Judas, having received a detachment of troops and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. And so firstly, what we're seeing here is that the religious Jewish leaders not only sent the great multitude, they were also there as part of that great multitude. Notice also that who accompanied the religious leaders and Judas the betrayer. Notice that it says in John's Gospel there, it says that they accompanied with them a detachment of troops. What is that? Well, it's referring to an organized group of Roman soldiers who were heavily armed. Now, there were two kinds of detachments of Roman soldiers that would often be sent out. The first detachment of soldiers that would be sent out was often called the cohort, and that consisted of about 600 to 1,000 soldiers who would be sent out. Other times, there was what was called the maniple, and there was a smaller group. It's hard to say the word small when that group of soldiers that would be sent out for missions like this would make up about 200 soldiers. Whichever it was, we don't know for sure. Perhaps the lesser, I don't know, but perhaps the lesser, we don't know for sure. We can understand, however, why it is that Mark's account says a great multitude come to arrest Jesus. This is not just like one or two soldiers with a big group of disgruntled religious leaders coming, we've got, a bone to pick with you. This was a big deal. There could be literally hundreds of armed men coming to find Jesus. The sound of soldiers drawing closer with their militant stomps on the ground. The sight of bright lanterns and fire torches emerging from the darkness, seeing a little light in the distance, but seeing it come closer and closer and seeing the magnitude of how many men were coming. Now, if you're anything like me, the immediate question that comes to mind is, how were the religious Jews able to mobilize such a great number of these Roman soldiers? I mean, how did they do it? How could they enlist so much resource, such a great number of these Roman soldiers to come and to join their cause? After all, we know that Roman officials couldn't care less about the religious squabbles that took place between the Jews. They really couldn't care less. I mean, we see this throughout the book of Acts when the enemies of the gospel would try to use the state to try to persecute those or to prosecute them. Even when the Jews tried to get the Romans to prosecute the Apostle Paul, the Roman officials couldn't care less about their religious differences. But something that would catch their attention, something that they would raise an eyebrow to, something that they would tune their ears to, well, it had to do with rebellion against Rome. The Roman governors, the Roman officials, they had zero tolerance for any form of rebellion, any form of insurrection against Rome. If they got wind at all, any wind that there was going to be a revolt that was planned, if they got wind that, hey, there's going to be some defiance or some uprising against the Romans, well, what would happen is that the Romans would come with force and they would want to squash that insurrection as soon as they could. And what's more, the Jews, they were well known throughout history for seeming to produce these zealots, these men who would rise up and try to lead uprisings against Rome. They had a whole history of it. One after another throughout the Jewish history at that time tried to rise up against them. In fact, Barabbas, the one who was released instead of Jesus, as we'll see when we get to Mark chapter 15, Barabbas, his crime for why he was incarcerated was insurrection. Barabbas, the one that they let free, was actually one of these ones who led a revolt against the Romans. And we see this in Mark chapter 15, verse 7. And if we fast forward a little bit in history, about 37 years from this point, it was the rebellious uprising of the Jews that would eventually result in the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. That's what it was. And so for the Jewish religious leaders to be able to mobilize this detachment of troops, of Roman soldiers, it's more than likely that what they did to do that is that they tried to frame Jesus as an insurrectionist. They would have tried to frame Jesus as the leader of a rebellion against the Roman Empire. After all, we know that Jesus' popularity at that time, it was at an all-time high. It was the time of the Passover. And not only those in Jerusalem, but those from surrounding regions had come right to Jerusalem at that time, and the streets were lined on that Monday, hailing him as the promised Messiah. Jesus' popularity was at an all-time high. And when we eventually get to Mark 15, we'll see the very first question, after being arrested, the very first question that Pilate, the Roman governor, asked of Jesus is, "Are you the king of the Jews?" That's the very first question that he asked Jesus. And why is that? Well, Pilate's question has to do with political governance. It has to do with, hey, are you trying to take over here? That's the nature of his question. This is how, no doubt, and most probably, he was framed in order to get this detachment of troops to follow these Jewish leaders. All that to say, this is a detachment of soldiers. This is what they were most likely thinking. This is what the detachment of soldiers, maybe 200, maybe 500, we don't know. No, this is what they were thinking as they were approaching the Garden of Gethsemane in the dead of night, heavily equipped with weapons and reinforcements. In their minds of these soldiers, they were thinking to themselves, we are here to arrest a rebel. We are here to arrest a man who is trying to take over things politically. We are here to arrest a man that wants to lead the Jewish people in a rebellion against the Roman Empire. And of course, this explains why there was so much of an overkill of military force that came to arrest Jesus, who was humbly waiting for them, by the way, in the Garden of Gethsemane. Well, the question is, what did the Roman soldiers discover? What did they discover? We know what they were probably thinking as they were marching to the Garden of Gethsemane, but what did they discover when they finally approached Jesus? Well, moving on from the hostile crowd, verse 43, we come next to the hypocritical traitor, verses 44 to 46. So give our attention to our Bibles, beginning verse 44. Now his betrayer had given them a signal, saying, "Whomever I kiss, he is the one. Seize him and lead him away safely." As soon as he had come, immediately he went up to him and said to him, "Rabbi, Rabbi," and kissed him. Then they laid their hands on him and took him. Now, something to understand here is that there is actually more taking place right here than what Mark's Gospel account actually gives us. And so, to give us a more complete picture of what's actually taking place here, I think it would be helpful for us at this point just to cross-reference a little bit. We'll do this a little bit as we go on following verses as well, but cross-reference to other Gospel accounts where this same account is being mentioned. Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, something that Matthew's Gospel adds is a question that Jesus asks of Judas. And so this is found in Matthew 26, verses 48 to 50. It says there, "Now his betrayer had given them a sign, saying, 'Whomever I kiss, he is the one, seize him.' Immediately he went up to Jesus and said, 'Greetings, Rabbi,' and kissed him." And here's the question. But Jesus said to him, "Friend, why have you come?" I just want us to notice there, in the question, the nature of the question there, notice the tenderness of Jesus. Is there not tenderness that's there? He addresses Judas as a friend. As a friend. How would we have responded? How would we have responded if there was someone who unjustifiably came to us and brought reinforcements and had gossiped around the place and tried to gather up as many people in opposition as possible to come against us? How would we respond? Jesus responds by calling him friend. Judas was no friend. Judas was an enemy. Yet even in the midst of Judas' deceitful and dishonest and his two-faced actions, Jesus demonstrates kindness. Jesus demonstrates gentleness. Jesus demonstrates warmth. You see, in 2 Peter chapter 3, it says that God is not willing that any should perish, but that all would come to repentance. In Ezekiel chapter 33, verse 11, it says that God has no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. See, Jesus was all too aware that Judas' future was sealed. Jesus knew that Judas was the son of perdition, as he's mentioned about elsewhere. That Judas was destined for hell, where he would be tormented day and night for all eternity. But Jesus wasn't rude. Jesus wasn't angry. Jesus wasn't discourteous. Instead, he tenderly calls him friend, while giving, of course, Judas the opportunity to come clean about his true motives. As for Judas, we have to understand this. At this present time, I'm not talking the present time back then, I'm talking right now where we are living right here today. We need to understand that for Judas at this present time, January 2020, we can know that Judas is currently suffering in Hades. It is the temporary holding place before he will be resurrected and he will be cast into the lake of fire with all of those whose names are not in the Lamb's book of life. That's the reality for Judas right now, real time. Yet for Judas, I wonder if this particular scene is just sort of playing out over and over and over again in Judas' mind. That even in the height of his rebellion against Jesus, Jesus is still there, warmly addressing him as friend. Sometimes you hear people say that it's unfair that God doesn't prevent people from going to hell. No, it's not. Every single person that ends everyone who ends up in hell, there is not one person who will be able to justifiably point the finger at God and say, hey, God, this is your fault. You know one person who knows that truth? It's Judas. Judas knows that it was his sin that sentenced him to eternal punishment, despite the kindness and the goodness of God right before his very face. Friend, why have you come? In Luke's Gospel account, he records another question that Jesus asks of Judas. This is in Luke 22:48. Jesus said to him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? Now, it was a Middle Eastern culture at that time. That a kiss, it was a sign of respect. A kiss was a sign of affection. Sometimes a kiss would be delivered on one's feet, on one's hand. Sometimes a kiss would be delivered on the hem of one's garment. But for a kiss to be delivered on one's cheek, that was an act that symbolized close friendship and symbolized mutual affection. Yet, though this act that would usually express devotion and love, it was through this act that Judas instead demonstrates deceit. He takes something that should have been warm and affectionate and he demonstrates deceit, he demonstrates dishonesty, he demonstrates fraudulence. He's two-faced. Now, shifting over to John's Gospel account, one more thing to point out before moving on. There's something very unusual that takes place here that's not mentioned in Mark or in Matthew or in Luke. Something that is mentioned in John's Gospel, something very unusual here that takes place when the hostile crowd approaches Jesus. Well, what is this unusual thing? John 18, beginning in verse 4, it says, Jesus therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said to him, whom are you seeking? They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus said to them, I am he. And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Now when he said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. That's not unusual. It's a little interesting little fact to put in there, isn't it? With it being dark, it's probably hard to distinguish between Jesus and the disciples at that point in time. So they'll ask him, where is he? Which one of you men is Jesus? Notice in verse 5 that after they ask Jesus about his identity, how does Jesus respond? He says, I am he. Now something we need to understand, I'm not going to lose us here. Something we need to understand here is that in the original language, it's not 3 words, it's just 2 words. The word he is not there in the original language. In the original language, there are only 2 words that's translated I am. That's all that he says. That's why the New King James Version, if you look at the New King James Version, if that's on your lap right now, you'll see the word he is in italics. And that tells us that's been added in by the translators to try to help us to better understand what is being said in this passage. In this instance, the word he, it's not helpful. It doesn't really help us. Because when Jesus used the words I am, not I am he, but in the original language, I am, it was a phrase which pointed to his deity. It is a phrase that pointed to the fact that he is God. Right throughout the Gospel of John, there were many I am statements. I am the good shepherd. I am the door. There is one after another. And these I am statements, they root themselves right back to the book of Exodus, right back to the days of Moses. When God revealed his identity to Moses, God revealed himself to Moses and said, I am. When Moses asked God, hey, God, who should I tell the Egyptians that you sent me to them? And how does God answer? He says, tell them that I am sent you. Notice in verse 6 that as Jesus declares this divine identity, I am, that Judas and his soldiers, they fall back. There was such a display of divine presence. There was such a display of divine majesty and divine power. Those two words forced his enemies, made them powerless to stand before the Son of God. Now, of course, what this does for us, it serves as a reminder, another reminder to us, doesn't it? What does it remind us of? It reminds us that Jesus merely wasn't just a victim of circumstance. He wasn't just caught up at the wrong time in the wrong place, but instead this demonstrates to us that Jesus was in complete control of the situation each step of the way. As Jesus said earlier in John's Gospel, John chapter 10, verses 17 to 18, he says, I lay down my life that I may take it again. He says, no one takes it from me, but I lay it down myself. I have the power to lay it down. I have the power to take it again. Let's remember that Jesus willingly and voluntarily faced the cross. And you know what? Jesus didn't face the cross for a bunch of good guys, but instead he faced the cross on a world of Judases. Those who had turned their back, who spat in his face, literally, figuratively, so to speak. He died for a group of Judases. You know what? He died for you and me. We are the Judas in the situation, as I mentioned last week. We are the ones who just rebel right in the face of Christ. Yet although he could have escaped from that, he willingly and voluntarily laid his life down for you. And he did it for me. Well, the next question is really, well, what was the disciples' response? How did the disciples respond? We see the hostile crowd, we see the traitor that's there as well, but how did the disciples initially respond to the arrest of Jesus? Well, moving on from the hypocritical traitor, verses 44 to 46, we move next to the response of the hasty disciple. This is verse 47. So let's give our attention to verse 47. And one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Now, similar to the passage we just looked at, not all the details are given here. This is kind of a brief, summarized version that's here. And so let's just cross-reference a little bit to better understand what was taking place with the hasty disciple. In John's account, we're given the identity of who this hasty disciple is, and we're also given the identity of the high priest's servant whose ear was cut off, and we're also given part of Jesus' response to that. So if we look over to John 18, verses 10 to 11, it says, Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Now, so Jesus said to Peter, Put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? So, probably no surprises here. Impetuous Peter is at it again. But here's the thing about Peter. Peter was a fisherman. Peter wasn't some military guru. Peter wasn't a swordsman. He was not qualified to go swinging around a sword. He was a fisherman. He was one for pulling up nets, not trying to wield around a sword. As he impulsively just swung that sword, he missed where he was probably trying to aim. Do you think that Peter was trying to aim for his ear? I doubt it. Someone's coming for you, he is aiming for that guy's head. But here he is, good old fisherman Peter, he only managed to sever his ear. That was his best shot. It wasn't the best shot though, was it? Swing and miss. But when we take a step back, we can't help but ask the question, what on earth was Peter thinking? Think about it. I mean, did he really think that he was going to, with his sword, fisherman, take on the whole Roman detachment and all the religious Jews who were coming there at that time? There could be literally hundreds of them. Is that what he thought? What on earth was Peter thinking? Or maybe Peter was simply desperate to try to prove himself to Jesus. Maybe it was, it was only just that matter of hours before that we know that Jesus predicted something, didn't he? He predicted as they were on their way to the Garden of Gethsemane, he says, all of you disciples, you remaining 11, or one has betrayed me, the rest of you 11, all of you will abandon me. Peter tried to speak up at that point, I'll never abandon you. He says, oh, by the way, Peter, you're going to deny that you even knew me 3 times before this night is out, and you're going to do it before the rooster crows twice. Maybe Peter was just going to be desperate, try to prove himself to Jesus. Maybe that was what was motivating him. Maybe there was something else that was motivating him. Maybe it had something to do with the I am statement of Jesus and all those soldiers kind of falling down, religious leaders falling to the ground. Maybe that kind of boosted, Peter's confidence going, yeah, we're in this thing together and, perhaps the power of God is with me also and here we go. Either way, there are a couple of things that would have really brought Peter's thoughts back to earth. He wasn't thinking right. He wasn't thinking rationally. But there are 2 things that would have brought his thinking back down to earth. First thing, probably had to do with the swing and miss. I mean, at that point, he probably realised that he wasn't Iron Man. Probably realised that he wasn't Captain America or, Captain Israel or whatever you want to call it. He probably, the reality at that point probably set in for him, man, if I couldn't even take on the high priest's servant, probably wasn't even armed at the time, to be honest, how was he going to take on this whole Roman detachment of soldiers that came after him? So this is probably the first thing that was a little bit of a blow to Peter's confidence. There's probably a second thing that would have knocked his confidence a little bit, and that's what Jesus said to him in John chapter 18, verse 11. He says, Jesus said to Peter, put your sword in its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which the Father has given me? Well, what does he mean by that? Well, Peter was probably, thought that he was helping with God's will. Jesus makes it very clear, hey, Peter, you're actually getting in the way of God's will. He was trying to help, I'm sure that's what his motive was, but he didn't realise he was getting in the way of God's will. Jesus is basically saying, Peter, you're actually trying to prevent me from following through what it is that God wants for me to do. Maybe Peter had bought into that false idea that many buy into today, that God's will for you is always going to be easy, that God's will for you is always going to be prosperous materially or earthly speaking. Maybe Peter had bought into that kind of idea. Maybe he didn't realise that God's will for our lives isn't always easy. And if we have any dispute of that, we just need to look to the cross of Jesus Christ. I think this serves as a good reminder to us that zeal without knowledge is not always a good thing. Zeal without knowledge is not always helpful. It's possible for a Christian to be all excited. It's possible for a Christian to be full of energy, full of passion. But unless that passion is harnessed, unless that passion is undergirded with good theology, that person has the potential to excitedly go down the wrong path. So often, we look on the outside, don't we? I mean, that's all we can really do a lot of times. But so often we look on the outside of someone, outside at someone, and we go, wow, that person's on fire, isn't he? She's on fire, look at her go. Just bear in mind, as we've recently found out in Australia, Fire is only beneficial if it's harnessed, if it's governed in the right context. Fire that is not governed correctly can turn into what? It can turn into wildfire. It can cause a lot of damage in its path, a lot of damage along the way. And rest assured, the aim isn't to try to dampen anyone's enthusiasm. If anyone's feeling excited about the Lord, don't go, oh no, you're not allowed to feel excited, you just have to have a frown. I mean, we're not kind of going to that extreme. We're not trying to dampen anyone's enthusiasm for the work of the Lord. Instead, we're just saying we've got to make sure that our enthusiasm is channeled in the direction that God wants for our enthusiasm to go. And the only way that it's possible for our enthusiasm to be channeled in the direction that God wants us to go is when our knowledge is grounded in the Scriptures, when our knowledge is accompanied with good theology. Don't ever think that good theology is going to dampen one's enthusiasm. Good theology helps to direct and to channel the enthusiasm in the direction that God wants for it. Peter, on the other hand, zeal without knowledge. He had a passion, didn't he? Sure, he had enthusiasm, he had plenty of passion, but his passion and enthusiasm were unknowingly working against the purposes of God. Well, moving on to Luke's account, we're told that Jesus miraculously heals the man's ear. Luke 22, 50 and 51. And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus answered and said, "Permit even this." And he touched his ear and healed him. I don't know what you think, but I reckon about this time the detachment of soldiers are probably starting to second guess themselves. They're kind of thinking, hang on a minute. They're looking at the Jews and thinking, I think we've been plagued by these guys. I think these guys are just taking us for a ride. This big insurrectionist, the king of the Jews, is going to take over and lead a rebellion against the Roman Empire. And there he is, meeting them, not trying to run, no weapons in his hands, showing love to his betrayer, kindness, tenderness to his betrayer, supernaturally healing, doing what he can to those who have come to oppose him. One more cross-reference, Matthew 26, verses 52 to 54. This is where we're given yet another interesting piece of information. It says, "But Jesus said to him, 'Put your sword in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Or do you think that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels? How then could the Scriptures be fulfilled that it must happen thus?'" And so what Jesus does is if there wasn't already enough kind of weight to why Peter shouldn't have taken the sword out of its sheath, Jesus now in this passage adds 3 more reasons for why Peter shouldn't have used the sword. First reason, verse 52, Jesus says, "All who take the sword will perish by the sword." I mean, think about this. If Judas had successfully killed the servant of the high priest, he would have been arrested for unlawful taking the life of another person, and he would have most likely been served the death penalty. Which I think serves as a reminder to us that the kingdom of God is not advanced through political or through military force. But the kingdom of God is advanced through the preaching of the gospel and through the preaching of the gospel alone. I don't know if about you, I'm getting kind of excited to see what's happening in the States with the pro-life stuff that's happening over there. Wow! The most powerful leader on the face of this earth, humanly speaking, is backing something that really needs to be, demolished and done away with. He's encouraging for this law to be overturned that really should have never been put into law in the first place. And we get excited. And why do we get excited? Because we've got some political force behind us. We'll see transformation in our society now. Although political and military force can be, exciting, it's nice when you've got a couple of extra guys on your team. We have to understand, again, the kingdom of God is not advanced through military force or through politics, but the kingdom of God is advanced through the preaching of the gospel and the gospel alone. You want to see transformation in our society? It's not by just electing the right president and prime minister. It is through you and I being faithful to what it is that Christ has called us to do, and is preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. First thing that Jesus points out, those who use the sword die by the sword. Second reason that Jesus gives for why Peter shouldn't use the sword is that Jesus didn't really need his help in the first place. I mean, verse 53, Jesus says that he could have instantly called for assistance of, notice it there, legions of angels if he wanted to. Many, many legions of angels. Well, what is that telling us? It's telling us here that, hey, 12 legions of angels, they could have assisted him instantly. Anytime Jesus just had to say it. Now, what is a legion? A Roman legion, it was made up of 6,000 soldiers. And so when Jesus is talking about 72, when he's saying, I have 12 legions, he's saying, I have 72,000 angels who could arrive right on the scene, right now, if I wanted them to. You think I need some fishermen swinging around a sword right now? I have over 72,000 angels. And if you think back to 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 35, it records that one angel took the life of 185,000 soldiers. Well, how much more? 72,000 angels do. How much damage could they do? It represents an unimaginable power that was right there at Jesus' fingertips. Again, Jesus didn't need Peter's help. The third reason for why Peter shouldn't have drawn a sword is just simply because his actions were running contrary to Scripture. Verse 54 of John, Jesus reminds Peter, hey, you know what? All these things have to happen in fulfillment with the Scriptures. Well, we've seen the response of Peter, a hasty disciple. How does Jesus respond? How does he respond to it all? Moving on from the hasty disciple, verse 47, we come next to the heroic Christ. This is 48-49. Notice it in your Bibles. Then Jesus answered and said to them, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to take me? I was daily with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me, but the Scriptures must be fulfilled. Now notice this. In the middle of this intense situation, what is Jesus like? Is he all frazzled? Is he tripping over his words? Is he breaking out into a sweat? No. In this intense situation, we see that Jesus is composed with divine tranquility. So much so that he poses a very reasonable question to his enemies, to his potential captors. I mean, everyone knew that Jesus wasn't a violent criminal. If he was some sort of armed bandit who was on the run after stealing people's stuff, well, the scene would have looked a little bit different. So why was it necessary to bring such an extensive military force? That's essentially the question that Jesus poses to them. Why? Why all this? Was he a danger and a threat to Rome? Because if he was, why was he arrested weeks before that? It's not like he just immediately at that point became a danger to Rome. What Jesus is doing here is he's exposing the hypocrisy and the cowardice of nature of the religious Jewish leaders. It was only back at the beginning of Mark 14, the religious leaders, they feared what sort of public reaction would come about if they arrested Jesus at that very time. And so what do? Religious leaders, like cowards, they make up a false accusation against Jesus. They come to arrest him when he's outside of the city gates in the cover of darkness, and they're accompanied with an overkill of military force. Yet despite how many soldiers accompanied them, Jesus makes it clear the only reason they could take him into custody is, what does it say there? Because it's in fulfillment of the Scriptures. Ultimately, everything that was taking place wasn't happening according to man's agenda. Ultimately, everything that was taking place was happening according to God's agenda. This is the way that Jesus responds. He's bold, he's heroic, he's confident in the face of his enemies. Which leads us finally now to the horrified apostles, verses 50 to 52. We see the response here of Jesus' 11 remaining disciples, along with one other unidentified man. And really, what is the response? It's summed up in what? In 7 words. Verse 50. Then they all forsook him and fled. That's the response. Then he goes on to say, it's quite interesting, verse 51, now a certain young man followed him, having a linen cloth thrown around his naked body, and the young men laid hold of him and left the linen cloth and fled from them naked. Pretty much makes sense, eh? No. No explanation needed there. My cheeky children. And they found out that it would be up to this part. They've been looking forward to this part. Hey, Dad, why don't you do an in-depth expository sermon on this passage? Just these 2 verses here. Dad, we want to see what sort of 3-part outline that you have. All the words are going to begin with P, and in-depth application accompanied with many, many kids' points throughout these 2 verses. What do we have here? We have a certain situation which only Mark records in his gospel account. We can't do any cross-referencing to try to better understand what it is that's taking place here. This doesn't stop Bible commentators from speculating, what happened and who was this young man. Here's what a number of people think. Some people say that the young man was actually Mark himself. That's why he was the only one that had these intimate details, intimate knowledge of what it is that was taking place there. Why did he only have a linen cloth wrapped around him? Well, because he had been in bed asleep. And as he was awoken by the commotion of the soldiers marching by, he didn't really have time to get dressed, and so he wrapped himself in a linen cloth. Apparently Mark slept naked. And then he followed the crowd to the Garden of Gethsemane. So that when everything started, breaking loose and everything like that in the Garden of Gethsemane, everything was going down. Mark kind of gets caught up in this thing. He manages to slip away, but unfortunately without his linen cloth. It's an interesting story. I'm sure if we all sat around with a few ginger beers this afternoon, I'm sure we could come up with something like that as well. Again, all we have is what the Scripture tells us. And the Scripture doesn't identify the man, doesn't identify any other circumstances than what it is that we have right here. So what this means for us is that we just got to wait to heaven, and we can go up to Mark and say, hey Mark, who was the naked guy? Was it you? Were you the one? When you say it was a whole lot of trouble, and to say it was you, why did you have to, torment the commentators throughout church history trying to figure out who is the identity of this young man with the linen cloth? Well, taking a step back, the main thing to recognise here is not the man on the linen cloth, or how he slept in the evenings. The thing to really recognise here is the main thing is that what Jesus was about to experience in these series of horrific events that would follow, he would be experiencing them alone. He would be lonely. He would be abandoned. There wouldn't be anyone standing with Jesus when he walked down this path that he had to walk. It was a lonely path. He knew that this would be the case. He had shared the predictions already with his disciples. But now the time had come to walk this lonely path to the cross. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be without much pain, with much distress. But Jesus was willing. He was willing to take the hard path because he knew it was the will of the Father for him. That's our Jesus. That's the captain of our salvation. That's the anchor on whom we hold our salvation is connected to and bound to. That is Jesus Christ, the Son of God, looking boldly in the face of his enemies and takes the path that's hard because he knows it's the will of the Father. Next Sunday, the drama continues. We look at Jesus' actual denial of Jesus. But in the meantime, I think we've covered enough already. So let's just bring these things to the Lord in prayer and ask that God might apply what it is that we've seen from his word today. So let's